what little success that I may have had throughout my career, your father helped instill it in me, and I can always see that he instilled a lot of that good business savvy, good people savvy, good just good morals in you and the rest of your family. So I'm glad I can call you friends.
Welcome to Your Authentic Executive. Today's guest is someone I've known about since I was a kid, and actually had the chance to meet him several times at our home when I was growing up. My dad hired Bob as a college recruit, and I grew up hearing my dad brag about Bob Gerst. In fact, I was at a wedding a week ago with my family, and I asked my brothers, hey, does Bob Gerst ring a bell to you? And everybody said, Bob Gerst, yes, we heard that all the time. My dad passed away in 2021, and last fall I shared his favorite poem on LinkedIn for his birthday. And it was one that he had printed and taped to his big wooden, I call it a madman desk. And he read it every single morning. And Bob, you commented on that post that I shared. You said, your dad read that poem several times while I worked with him. And at the time, it really didn't make as much sense. But today, when I read it, it's such a powerful moment. And Bob, that comment really caught my heart because I've heard that poem. Actually, my dad could recite that poem, dementia, in his final days as he was passing away. And so I thought, gosh, this is a conversation I would love to have with Bob Gerst. And so this is, I don't know, we had a conversation to tee this up, but it's the first time I'm going to say in 50 years, 40 years.
Wow. Let's not use years. Okay.
Yeah. So I want to just paint a quick picture of my dad before we dive in. And by the way, if my dad was around, he would just be beaming that we're having this conversation because he loved both of us. So he loved you like a child, Bob.
Thank you.
So Dad grew up on a rural farm in Missouri, and he was the only sibling of his generation to attend college. Attending college was so important to him, and he made sure that his 3 kids would attend college. And we were the first of our generation, actually, to attend and complete college. In college, Dad experienced his first indoor plumbing, and my mom would talk about going to meet his family and being sent out to the outhouse with the Sears catalog as toilet paper. And so, yeah, he grew up in a very rural context. He majored in accounting and was recruited by what he described as the largest company in the world at the time, Pete Marwick Mitchell and Company, and he was hired as an auditor. But Dad was very social and well-connected on campus, and they asked him to help out at a career fair one day. And it was at this career fair that Dad fell in love with recruiting. So Dad was transferred from St. Louis, Missouri to Wall Street. And he said that he had to learn what fork to use. I mean, he had no context of what does it mean to work with a significant global firm on Wall Street. And he was completely out of his element. And again, he had one of those big, huge wooden, I call it a madman desk with he called it the breadboard that he would pull out from that desk. And there was a poem that he taped to that breadboard, and he said he read it to himself every morning. And later it ended up framed on his office wall. And one of the things that I received when Dad passed away was this poem that he had framed to his wall. And I just want to read the first stanza of it, if you would bear with me. It couldn't be done. Somebody said it couldn't be done, but he, with a chuckle, replied that maybe it couldn't, but he would be one that wouldn't say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with the trace of a grin on his face. If he worried, he hid it. And he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done. And he did it. Bob, when you think about that poem and you think about my dad and the time how long did you work with my dad? How long was it that the two of you worked together?
Well, quite a number of years, actually. And by the way, thank you, Janine, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you for allowing me to spend time with you today. And you've brought back lots of memories, so I appreciate that. I thought about, since we've talked about this, what resonated with him, and why over time it really said something to me. And there were really kind of two parts that I think was important to him, and it's brought up in several different places in the poem. It talks about, take off your coat, and what I think that's communicating is, you know do it, get it done. Jim was a doer, and again, I think that comes from his farming background. You couldn't sit around and wait for the weeds to take over the field. You had to do something about it. You had to take your coat up, roll up your sleeves, and just get it done. And that was him. That was his belief in terms
Mm.
of it. And then it says again in several places, sing as you tackle. Um, and that means I think, to Jim and to me as I hear it, that means that you have opportunity to either be negative or positive. And in this poem, it talks about you can get a lot more work done if you take the positive approach. And I know there were several times when things didn't go our way when we were working together, and and I had probably times that I was dark and down, and and I I was always amazed at how resilient Jim was, how upbeat he was, and he was more than a half glass full kind of guy, and that has stuck with me throughout my work life, and personal life as well. And I think that's the reason why he was married for 60 years. That's the reason why he had such great kids, because he was someone that you could use as a role model, with that resilience, with that positive attitude.
There's a guy named Sean Acor. I don't know if you've heard of him, and he did research on happiness and has a book called The Happiness Advantage, I think, and it is not a new book. And he's got this quote I love. He says, "I don't care if you're a cup half full or a cup half empty person. What I care about is what do you have in the pitcher that you're holding to fill it up." And I like that, and I like how you have described Dad. Do you have any examples of stories where his mindset, it's called mindset regulation, if you're talking to a brain scientist, how his mindset kind of in the midst of something hard that didn't go your way, how it made a difference?
Yeah, he had me work on what we called then a state of the staff. And if you remember, this was paper and pencil time. We were
Mhm.
before computers, couldn't hit a button and print off anything. You had 14 column worksheets and tick marks, and how many males and females, and what age band, and so forth. And so you had to go to the personnel file and tick off your 14 column worksheet on whatever it was that you were inventorying. And he wanted to get a picture of our workforce, because understanding kind of what comprised our workforce, we were then going to create plans going forward in terms of how to add to that, where we had weaknesses, where we had holes in that workforce. So it was a great idea, great conceptual, but it took forever. And I spent weeks, if not months, opening up files, ticking off on this worksheet. And Jim and I were going to make a presentation to the managing partner. And it was a Friday afternoon. It was later. It was like 5:30 or something like that. And I had just pages. I mean, it was the end report was, I could have made a book or a novel out of it. And so I went through it and gave kind of the high points. And I was pretty proud of it. In addition to it occupying a lot of my life at that time. And the managing partner, when I got done, he said, "Now, are you done?" And I said, "Yeah, that's kind of the summary of it." And he took it, and I remember this. I can close my eyes and picture this. He took out the 3 pages out of this stack, set them over here, and then took the rest of it and threw it in the wastebasket. And I was just shock and devastated and couldn't believe it. And he said, not that it's, not good stuff, but he said, what we really need is these 3 pages. And so we did some more work and left. And I remember going to Jim's office and just being crestfallen. And Jim was as positive as if the managing partner wanted to publish the report. He was so pumped up, and he said, we gave him exactly what he was looking for, which was a picture of our staff, and there were some takeaways, and so you have to look at it in terms of that we accomplished that objective. All I could see was tossing the my novel into the wastebasket. I've oftentimes brought that picture back to mind that that it is you have to look at what you have, not what you don't have.
Oh, I like that. I like that. I like your taking, because those aren't words I don't know that I heard Dad say, but take that and turn that into something that is a Bob Gerstian comment.
He had several of those, so I
he,
can't claim too many of it.
It's one of the things that I grew up hearing about since I was a little girl. We moved from New York City to Chicago suburbs, from Pete Mark Mitchell and Company to one of its competitor organizations. And the reason we moved was that Pete made a decision that if you were working in personnel, you couldn't become partner. And that was my dad's dream, was to become partner. And in fact, there's a story in there somewhere, from poverty to partner. That was his vision. And he worked his tail off in Chicago, in the suburb. He just worked his tail off, got up, caught the 5 o'clock train every morning. And I would catch it with him on Saturdays and ride the train in and run the switchboard with Faye, silver hair. I still remember silver-haired Faye. And it was another Mad Men era of the switchboard, plugging things in, and Mr. Gerst, call on line 5, Mr. Gerst, and so I would go in with him and see him, working so hard to be a partner. And this time it didn't happen. My hypothesis was because Dad wasn't as good at navigating the politics required. And you've talked a little bit about, you were very familiar that was his goal. You were very familiar with that journey, and I'm thinking you're in your 20s. Is that right? During all?
Yes.
So you're a young professional navigating this, and when you look at that story, you kind of, what is your perspective of that, and how Dad responded when that final decision was made about his not becoming a partner?
Yeah, I always kind of struggle with what not understanding the politics means exactly. But in my definition, Jim was a very social person, but sometimes didn't know, how to completely create an alliance
Mm.
with someone, because he thought good work. That's his Lutheran background. Good work will make it all work, and you don't have to do anything other than good work. And so that's why he worked as hard as what he did, because he wanted to have that good work come through. Um, and um, and I just don't think that he understood that it was going to take more than that. And it was an era, and you've used this term several times. We were personnel, we were overhead. We didn't make a dime of revenue, and I don't think that Jim as effectively communicated how, if you have a good HR function
Mm.
and you understand the business, that you can impact that business in a positive, and if you don't do it well, in a negative manner. One of the things that I think, and we might get to it later on, some of the startup HR functions that I have done in my career, you really do have to first understand the business, and then figure out how to take the HR things and use the levers in that to positively impact the business. And so um, it was a tough time. We were overhead without the alliances created, and all it takes is one partner to have it out for you. And so he didn't make it. I didn't make it. There were people that did, so there were people that had it figured out. We just didn't.
Do you remember, like, because you were part of that whole journey, do you remember how Dad responded when when he got this devastating news?
Yeah, to your point, I mean, he had poured everything. I'm sure he missed lots of things in your life, lots of things with your mom, um, and so he had a lot of him invested in this. So it was difficult, but true Jim, he took it, let the emotion, kind of ring inside of him, and then he moved on and became very successful in a number of other organizations.
And I remember you said something when we were talking before, to prepare for our conversation today. You said that there's some things he took ownership of. He said, I could have done this, I could have done that, and that, he took shared ownership of this is kind of what happened. And then
Yep.
as a doer in true form, he moved to what's next and began working somewhere else. It's interesting. You talked about learning the business. At one point, he had me meet with another version of Bob Gerst. This guy's name was Kevin Coleman. And Kevin Coleman. We all grew up with all these names. Dad he just loved finding young talent
Yep.
and going to. I remember on our way to my grandparents, we'd drive by Notre Dame and we'd see the Gold Dome, and he must have traveled there with you guys, and we'd pick him up
Yep.
and go to see and he just loved the stories of amazing young talent that he was able to kind of help launch their careers. And Kevin Coleman was another one of those. I don't know if he started out in accounting or if he was a true HR
No, he was a real
hire.
HR.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I met him at was it Continental Bank? What was the bank in
Yep.
Chicago? Was it
Hmm.
Continental Bank?
Hmm.
Because I was a recruiter in Chicago and was thinking what's next. And Dad said, go meet with Kevin Coleman. So I went and met with him. And the first thing he said to me was, you need to do something on the business side. not just HR, you don't add value. You need to do something on the business side. And I went to work for a technology company, and I remember learning how to crawl under the floors of the computer rooms to understand what they were doing, and what that business was, and taking value, learning how do I add to the business of this firm. And that comes from that same kind of generation of what you learned about learning the business. So
I have to tell you that that has continued throughout my career. Fast forward to when I worked in Las Vegas and joined one of the hospitality and gaming companies. And I remember the president of the company as I was kind of on my first day, and he said, Bob, for the first 100, 120 days, you're not going to do anything HR related. I said, oh, huh? And he said, yeah. He said, we've got a schedule, and they had me on a rotation. So I was a week long housekeeper. I was a week long car parker. I was a
wow.
week long food delivery. I was a week and did all of those functions because I had never been in the hospitality industry. And not that being a hospital or a housekeeper for a week makes you an expert at it, but I have to tell you, I was much more aware of what they had to do and what they had to put up with after that week than had I not had that. And I was a much more effective HR executive because I understood those things. So it's nothing like parking a car
Mm.
in Las Vegas when it's 120 degrees out and it's 150 degrees on that blacktop. Um, you kind of get it, and that to me has always really resonated as a strength of mine.
It makes me think of the TV show that used to be Undercover Boss, where they would take the CEO and have
I,
him go under,
I remember
and that
those.
the valuing of what does it mean to sweep the floor? What does it mean to prep food? What does it mean? Did you get to deal cards at all? Did you learn
I
how to
went to
deal?
dealer's school. I did.
Oh, that must have been fun. I love it. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
So that takes us to this next era of your career, which what you had numerous roles as an HR executive, and we've talked about my dad kind of being a closet cleaner and a maintainer of systems more. He actually referred to himself as a closet cleaner, and you it strike me more as being a builder. And builders encounter all kinds of things while they're building, including resistance, right? Because organizations um, are often steeped in the way it's been done, and building means that we're changing things. And HR often comes in from a position of less power in driving change in organizations because of that not participating in the revenue generation of the organization. Like, what if you were to say, boy, here was my approach to implementing change, to building departments, building systems, and here is if there's an example of bumping into resistance and navigating that, like, what was your secret sauce?
Yeah, first of all, the marketplace had shifted over time, and you had a bit more receptive workforce.
Mm.
They could appreciate in terms of how doing HR well could help them do their job better. But you still had to kind of keep reminding them. And the thing that I tried to always ensure that I was doing was to create processes so that the less value added things would be done, if not almost automatically, with very little time and attention with anyone, and therefore freeing you up for things that are more value added and higher level. So that
Mm.
did two things, I think. It got the day to day stuff done, but gave you the opportunity to be much more of a strategic involvement person. Um, and so that was number one. Number two is that you really had to, again, back to what we talked about with Jim. You had to form those alliances. You had to have those internal champions, and people like to talk about themselves. So you need to stop into the head sales guy and talk about, now how did you do that? How why were you so successful in terms of, they love to have that conversation, but you're getting something out of it because you're understanding that business. And really the lead HR guy and the CEO are the two people that really do have a pretty good umbrella look at the organization. And the sales guy is probably not talking with the IT person. That's just how they are. And when you hear little bits and pieces from both of them, and you can connect the dots, and you can say to the head sales guy, I know that IT is looking at salesforce.com right now, and it will do these 6 things and you've mentioned 5 of them that are weaknesses. Well, the lead sales guy goes, "Oh, really? That would be so great. That would, provide us with, blah, blah, blah." And so understanding that business, doing the day-to-day stuff, and helping to understand, the pain points that those senior leaders are going through. I think that's an important element to a successful HR function.
It kind of connects to the story you told about Las Vegas, where you went out. You didn't necessarily do their jobs, but I mean, maybe you did have some windshield time with some of the sales folks. But going and hearing their story, hearing their experience, having empathy for that experience, and then speaking solutions into that experience.
Too many HR people like to create parties. I'm all in favor of parties, but that's not what senior leadership wants to have. Yes, they want to have parties to help create cohesiveness and engagement and positive attitudes. But I got to tell you, the workforce is changing too. Putting 3 more ping pong tables in the lunchroom is not going to make an engaged workforce. We've mentioned before, my experience is that people are looking for 3 things. They want an organization that is doing something good, worthwhile. They're not killing, baby seals. They are, finding new drugs to combat cancer, Alzheimer, or they're creating wealth and system wealth so that the population can have a better lifestyle. So the organization is doing something good, not negative. The second thing people want to know is, what is my role? What's my responsibility? How does what my job entail? Don't just say "and other duties as assigned." Make certain that I have a clear picture, a clear line of sight in terms of my role and responsibility. And then the third is ties those first 2 together. How does my role fit into what the organization is trying to do overall? And I tell senior leaders to, kind of every year, as a part of the performance appraisal process, help that person understand those 3 things. You should come back to that yearly, if not even more frequently, because they forget. And I think that if you can come back to those 3 things, that you have a much more engaged workforce.
Well, you just use the word engagement, and there are 2 questions on every engagement survey that I've ever seen. And one of them is, I know what's expected of me. And the second one is, I know how my work contributes to the mission and vision of the organization. And that's a wonderful regular pulse of are our folks connected to what's most important. It's interesting, Bob. I don't know if I shared this before, but my husband and I have a architecture studio, an architecture business. Mike is an architect, and his forte is auto dealerships. And some folks will go, auto dealerships. And it was interesting because I've gone to a couple of the AIA conferences, American Institute of Architects, with 40,000 of our favorite friends in Las Vegas or in New Orleans. Anyway, and at one conference there was somebody who spoke, a major political leader, who talked about the role of auto dealerships, of cars, the whole business in our society. And all of a sudden I started thinking about the nobility of that whole industry and how we contributed to that nobility, because soccer moms get their kids to the game in a car. We get to work in a car. And so there's all of this wonderful, noble stuff. What is the good that my organization does that we can connect to? And sometimes it's interesting when I'm working with executives who are kind of burning out, and it is not uncommon for them to say, I'm going to quit and go work for a nonprofit. And I'm like, that is not you're still bringing you to the nonprofit. so that's not, I don't know that will solve your solution. And looking for what is the nobility in the work that you're doing and connecting to that with some intentionality is really, really valuable. And it connects to that first point that you have of, I want to know that my company is doing something good.
Yep. And to your point, it doesn't have to be a not-for-profit. There are good for-profit that make lots of money. It really does depend in terms of, I think senior leadership and their mission and vision for their organization.
And if you can't find that intersection, my values and vision and the organization's values and if you can't find that intersection at the wrist here, then you need to look at what you're doing and figure out, where do you need to be and make a important and potentially difficult choice, which is a perfect segue into my third question for you, which is kind of where your career is today. And you're president of a job transitions organization and have a very successful podcast. And you refer to yourself as the job transition professor. That kind of tees into your the chairman of the board of a university, and you have taught in universities. And so tell me a little bit about the connection to is kind of the opposite side of recruiting. Now you're helping job folks show up at that recruiting.
Though somewhat similar, it's just from a different perspective. Well, my last full-time position was with the agriculture company, International Agriculture Company, and we grew and processed hops. And it was a fascinating experience. But I knew that at some point in time, my traditional, I have air quotes around that, role would wind down and I would retire. And I wanted to think about, what was that next chapter in my life. I knew I wasn't a golfer. I'm not a traveler. So I wanted to do something. So talked with my employer. I had for years and years been a coach to employees as they tried to find personal satisfaction and personal growth and opportunities. And I told my employer that I would like to, I think I'm a good coach, but what I don't know is I don't always know the why that I'm coaching the way that I'm coaching. And I'm a real big believer in lifelong learning. And so I said, I'd like to become a certified coach. They agreed with the value of that. And so I went and got my certification in coaching, and use that with our employees. And my employer didn't mind if I had an outside or two, as long as it didn't impact my normal day job. And pre-COVID, I was thinking one weekend about helping people who were going through a transition. And I thought, I can keep doing this kind of one-off at a time. It's going to take me lots of years before I really have any meaningful impact. Or I could somehow scale it larger. And I thought thought it in a number of different ways. I could give public presentations, I could do training, I could create videos, and I had been an early user of podcasts, and I thought, that can't be that difficult. And so I did some research on it, and I bought the equipment, and literally a month and a half before we all locked down for COVID, I launched my first podcast. Fortunately, because that gave me something to do during what felt like a lifetime that we were all locked down, and I decided on my niche was going to be helping people that are going through this transition. So it's a college senior to first job, people between jobs, from jobs to being an entrepreneur, people jobs to retirement, any kind of transition that you might go through. And I've done one that someone was transitioning from a director to a vice president. There are differences that you experience, and she just wasn't, kind of thinking through, those kinds of things. And so that was one of the coaching assignments that I have. So any kind of transition you might go through in your work life, and I've really enjoyed it a great deal. I think I do help people. I get notes that I've helped people deal with both the tactical things you have to be aware of when you make a transition, as well as the emotional.
But I remember at one point, my dad went back to work for Pete Mark Mitchell and Company. Somebody he knew had become managing partner of the Chicago office. He thought his dream job had come back. And it turned out that particular managing principal was not, he was let go, and his whole team was let go, and Dad was a part of that. So he was looking for a job. And I don't remember what stage this was in my life. I just remember seeing Dad's office in the home. And one day I found stacks of letters that were his rejection letters. And I had this picture of my dad receiving letters saying, sorry, you're not a fit for this job. Sorry, you're not. And what that must have felt like. So the need to have this resilience that you're talking about, and kind of treating a job search like it is your job. And it turned out that it was somebody from our church who had Dad's resume, who was a doctor at the local hospital, and they were building their inpatient treatment center. And he dropped Dad's resume on somebody's desk, and they interviewed Dad, and Dad got that job and helped build this organization. And it was through a relationship that he had formed. It wasn't through sending resumes and filling out these forms. And so the importance of navigating those relationships and asking for help and being present in a way is absolutely core for anyone at any level in their job search, in their job transition, whether they are finding a job when they aren't employed, or they know that they're not a fit where they are right now and it's time to find something else. And so thank you for your work in continuing to be somebody who is in the people business and helping people in their transitions, which is a wonderful flip. I always tell people, I say two things to employers who are hiring and to people who are looking for a job. don't fall in love on the first date. You know
Yeah,
that.
it's probably lust. It's probably not love.
Yeah, it's just
Uh,
it doesn't work when you're dating,
yeah, yeah,
and it doesn't work when you're looking for a job.
yeah.
All of a sudden, oh, they said all of those things that are exactly or they said, like, test your assumptions in the interviewing process. Have an interviewing process that tests those assumptions for you interviewing the company and for you if you're interviewing candidates in the firm. And so just really important. And that kind of tees me up. I'm going to bring us to a little bit of a close here. And I'm I'm just like tickled pink to have this conversation.
Same here.
At some point, did you come to our home in Barrington and have dinner with us out on the patio?
Oh yeah, and I've swam in the lake that was behind it,
Yeah,
and jumped off the dock, and
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just remember that you all were like family to us. And when Dad turned 40, we had a 40th birthday party, and all you guys were there with your mustaches back, and that was in the
Yep.
era when shorts were short. And anyway, and I got this package of little things that you stick in cigarettes because everybody smoked then. And when you'd light a cigarette, it would explode like a
Yep.
firecracker. And it was cute at first, and then I made you all sick of me at that point. But I want to wrap with kind of the end of Dad's poem, which is very appropriate kind of for what we've just been talking about the challenges of mindset in career transitions or leading change. And I think about him sitting on Wall Street, working for the biggest company in the world. He was part of their process. He was brought into Washington, D.C. to learn about, during the civil rights era, how they would transform their recruiting process so that it included hiring people who might not normally get into an organization at that point where our country was. Really important things that he was a part of. And so seeing you kind of reminds me of these wonderful stories that I heard about my dad throughout my life. And he recited this up to leading up to his last days. There are thousands who will tell you that it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle right in with a bit of a grin. Then take off your coat and go to it. Just start to sing as you tackle that thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so much, and you've brought back a lot of wonderful, wonderful memories, and I what little success that I may have had throughout my career. Your father helped instill it in me, and I can always see that he instilled a lot of that good business savvy, good people savvy, good just good morals in you and the rest of your family. So I'm glad I can call you friends.